Hello and welcome to these TimesLive Dialogues in association with the Gautrain Management Agency. I'm Joanne Joseph, and over the next 4 weeks, we're going to focus on Gautrain and several of its facets. The Gautrain brand has been in existence for over 15 years. Construction on the project first began in September 2006. Now, prior to that, no such equivalent existed on the African continent. So it was little wonder that it was met with so much apprehension by the South African public at the time. But were those concerns founded, and where does the Gautrain brand stand today? We look back at those early days all the way through to the present and ponder over how branding and positioning can drive business momentum, more especially in a brand like Gautrain. Joining me now is Senior Executive Manager, Communication and Marketing at the Gautrain Management Agency, Dr Barbara Jensen. We're going to have a conversation in a short while, and of course, I need not remind you that we have a live chat going as well. So if you're watching from home or work or wherever you are, please post your live questions on there. I'll try and put as many questions as possible to Dr. Jensen Forster. And fortunately, we have a live audience in the studio with us today. Great, actually, to be doing that for a change post-COVID. But there are lots of prizes to be won, and some of those prizes are for those in the room, others are for those of you joining us online. So first of all, for those of you in the room, there is one 500 Rand Gautrain card to be won. It's, of course, there's also a 1,000 Rand Take-A-Lot voucher to go with that. So two things, 500 Rand Gautrain card and a 1,000 Rand Take-A-Lot voucher to be won if you are in the room. If you are joining us online, there is one 1,000 Rand Take-A-Lot voucher to be won, right? So one of those Take-A-Lot vouchers worth 1,000 Rand to be won if you are joining us online, and winners will be picked in a lucky draw, and of course the team will be communicating with you a little bit later on to tell you if you were the lucky recipient of any of these prizes. Now, let's get into our conversation without further ado, because it really is a fascinating one. I mean, on the face of it, when one talks about branding, you think, oh, well, perhaps this is going to be a run-of-the-mill conversation about, issues of how the brand has changed over the years, what one does to keep a brand in the public eye and so forth. But I don't think many people really know much about the early days of establishing the Gautrain brand and how the Gautrain team has gone about maintaining that brand over the years. So, Barbara, let me bring you into the conversation here. I understand you launched the brand on the day that the untidy, noisy work of construction began. And that sounds like a bit of a nightmare to actually launch a brand at that point.
Yes, it was. And what also was linked to that, it was the day that we signed the concession agreement. And I was standing on site with my team for the commencement of construction function, and we had a huge marquee tent and a big yellow caterpillar for, at that stage, Premier Mabizimo Shaloma was the Premier, for him to do the first toiling of the soil. There's a story to that as well. With Gautrain, there's so many stories. They first came to me with a silver, what do you call it? Neville, what do you call it? Spade.
Spade. Oh, yeah.
And I said, we're going to start the commencement of construction of the biggest infrastructure project on the continent, and he has to do it with a spade. I want one of those big yellow ganjas, So we got one.
Yeah.
And I kept on getting news from the office that they've not reached agreement yet. The concession agreement has not been signed. And I thought, okay, we're going to have a hell of a big lacquer party with all the food that's here, because the concession agreement has not been signed. But fortunately, they did come to an agreement and signed the concession agreement. We only came to financial close about 4 months later. The actual financial close documents were signed in January 2007. This was end of September 2006. And we launched the brand on that day, and it is the golden and blue brand. But a lot went before that, because this is a brand in a public-private partnership. It is a Gauteng provincial government brand.
Yeah.
So I had to work on the government side with the Office of the Premier, because all government brands, provincial government's brand resides under the auspices of the Office of the Premier.
Right. Is that quite tricky, though?
It's
Barbara?
very tricky.
Because you're bringing in a private brand and
Yes.
a recognized government brand together.
And to be commercial brand, that we have to sell to commuters,
Yeah.
to use the brand, and they have to associate with the brand. So you can't you can't have a very official government brand with 2 lions sitting and a shield, and people can't associate with that.
It's got to be accessible.
It has to be
somehow.
accessible. You
Yeah.
have to be able to sell that brand. You have to give it wings. It has to be used on brochures, and it literally, as I said, it has to be given wings. So, and it was a very tricky, fine line to walk, because at that stage, the Office of the Premier was very sticky to have any other brands but the provincial brand in government, and for good reason, because there were some government departments that were really abusing the provincial brand, and then on the other side, I had the private sector,
Yes.
the Bombela Concession Company, where they had a brand. They came to the party with a brand.
Yes.
And I went, oh, no, we're not going to change the name, because for 6 years we worked with the name Gautrain.
Yeah.
And I had a political committee that I worked with as our governing body. So we used to write political memos. So I wrote a political memo, and I said that the Gautrain name, we can change the brand, because we had a Gautrain brand, a little red train. I love that train, but it was very rudimentary. We can change the brand on either side. BC Bombela and us can change the brand, but we cannot change the name, Gautrain, because everyone called it the Gautrain by then. So we went jointly on a brand, Bombela and us joined forces, and we went on a brand. On a branding process, and we put it out to market. At that stage, it was Brand Activation that won the RFP to do the Gautrain brand.
Right.
Then in the beginning of 2006, there were 2 brands that won, very similar to what we have now, but with the South African flag colours. Then the politicians asked us we should put it out to market,
Right.
which we did, and the golden one won.
Yeah, look, I think it's a very beautiful one, actually,
It
from
is
an
very
aesthetic
simple.
point of view. It's simple and eye-catching at the same time. But this is what I wonder about. I mean, you were launching the brand at a time when you had nothing to literally, tangibly show
No,
for it, right?
no
You were
train.
still building, you had rubble, basically.
Yes, we had rubble. And at that stage, we were still knife edge whether we're going to have financial close with Bombela. So I had no train, a look of a train. So we and obviously the brand determines what your livery of the train looks like.
Yes.
So if you have a golden train, your train would be golden. So it was, I remember in the Bombela consortium, Bombardier was the company that supplied us with the rolling stock, the company that makes the trains.
Yes.
And they kept on coming with these dreary looks of trains.
Yeah.
It was red and blue and green. And I was talking to them, and I thought, but gold is our color,
Yes,
and
yes,
my
the
husband,
city of gold.
yes,
Yeah.
and my husband at that stage was driving a Mercedes. Please don't charge me royalties for that. But he was driving like a golden champagne color Mercedes, and I looked at this car. I was talking on my cell phone, and I was pacing up and down our stoop, And the car was standing under there, and I thought, but champagne, golden color. And I said, I want a golden train. But at this stage, I also started realizing everything we ask for is going to cost more money on value engineering and variation orders. So I said, will a metallic train cost more money? And the answer was no. And at that stage, I don't know now, it was the only metallic train in the world. So they were very excited to give us a metallic train, because they were also pushing the envelope on it.
Yes.
And it was not more expensive, because trains don't actually come in accidents unless they bump each other, you know, which we had one day in the yard. But that's a whole different story again. Stories on a Gautrain.
But that whole story of, like, you being offered the options of red trains and blue trains and so on, I mean, that's obviously the international convention. I think a lot of the European trains and so forth are that colour. You were working from virtually no template, because there was no green equivalent in Africa.
No, so as with, we always say Gautrain was a greenfields engineering project. So too, the branding of Gautrain was a greenfields project. So when we had the brand and the livery was decided on, we had 3 designs of the trains, what it will look like outside and inside. We took our politicians, they were going on an investment trip to the UK, and we were ready for them to look at the livery. And we took them to Bombardier's Derby factory in Birmingham, and they had the goggles on, that virtual reality, and they then decided on the final livery. So the 3-4 people in our political committee decided on the final livery, on what it looked like. So they put so I had 3 designs which we could live with, which I knew would be brandable, would be marketable, and also within parameters. Like the inside, I would have liked a little bit of more African material, but we had to live with what they had. We had such a for us, Gautrain, 24 trains was a lot.
Yes.
But in the international market, it's a very limited order. Right. So we could not have our own fabric, for example. Right. I had to decide within the spectrum that they had.
So there was an element of compromise.
There was an element of compromise.
I want to talk to you about, and there are quite a few issues that dogged the project at that time, right? So I want to go one by one through these issues. I mean, what about the worst fears? I think perhaps the foremost one at the time was that the Gautrain was going to become a white elephant.
That, you know, I always wonder where the term a white elephant comes from. Because you know, I went to bed with the Gautrain being a white elephant. I woke up with Gautrain being a white elephant, because that was the foremost criticism against Gautrain. And everyone at that stage, whether it was a political party, opposing political party, and we really worked hard to try and depoliticize Gautrain. Because the politicians at that stage that worked on the Gautrain knew that they were not going to be the politicians that were going to cut the ribbon, because this is going to be a long-term project. Right. It's not going to be a 4-year project, an 8-year project. You know, Mabazema Shalowa started with a project in 2000. We cut the ribbon in 2010. There were 3 premiers from him to Nomvula Mokonyane that eventually was the premier when we launched it 4 days before the Soccer World Cup. We opened the airport link. So this was really politicians in 2000 that started with the whole Blue IQ project, that had long-term vision, that invested in the long-term future of Gauteng. In investing in infrastructure projects that changed the trajectory of Gauteng. So we really had to work very hard to depoliticize Gautrain. But every politician or political party or individual that wanted centimeters per column or airtime, and you were part of the political history, media history of Gautrain or of Gauteng of that time, knew that if you wanted airtime, centimeters per column, just criticize Gautrain. Find an alternative for Gautrain. Find an alternative for the Gauteng provincial government, what to do with the money that you are going to invest in Gautrain, and you get your airtime. But one of the biggest lessons I've learned, not only professionally, but also personally on Gautrain, was we had to lose certain of the battles to win the war. And it was not easy, as a media person, to wake up to nasty headlines, to wake up to John Robbie once a week on 702, just all perky him, and I'm not a morning person, yes, John, and John going on about Gautrain, and eventually John became one of our biggest proponents, you know, where he gave us good airtime, and fair air, not good airtime, fair airtime, you know, and fair criticism, you know, so.
And that's a prevailing thought, isn't it? That you remain a skeptic as a member of the media until you have such evidence to prove that it's going to work.
We just wanted we wanted to have fair airtime and fair centimeters per column, because still today, you know, there are times where we need the criticism because things do go wrong. We run a public transport system 18 hours a day. 24 trains run every 20 minutes in peak hour, every 10 minutes up and down. There are 125 big buses that runs up and down. There are 120 minibuses. How can something not go wrong? We have power cuts. We have people that trip on escalators. So somewhere the cogs must come off. So, but it's how you manage it and how you come back that is important.
I want to ask you about that in a short while, but let's quickly get through some of these other aspects that were on the table at the time. I mean, fraud and corruption was of concern and was a legitimate one, given you know, the PPP and the fact that this is usually the cocktail for fraud and corruption in our country.
And when we started Gautrain in 2000, the clouds of the weapons scandal was gathering on our horizon. And this is the time we went to market looking for a PPP partner. Can you imagine the frowns on the faces we experienced when we went on international financial investor trips, when we had our investor conference in 2001. And this is the project where there was no fraud, no corruption. Because this is how we run this project. You know,
That's wonderful to hear, Barbara. I tell you, as both a South African citizen and a member of the media, it must be quite exceptional in that way. There was also what was known at the time as the NIMBY syndrome, not in my backyard. Nobody wanted a Gautrain station in their backyard.
Oh, my word.
How did you solve that?
Well, you know, we had to, because this, as you said in the beginning, we've never had a project like this before in South Africa. At that time, and it's changing, some of the process stations was not something that you typically wanted in your backyard or close to you. So we had to say, with projects like this in international communities, we had to. This is the experience. One of the ways we did solve it. And it changed a lot of the public agenda and the media agenda. Is in 2005, the year before we commenced construction, I had a media trip overseas. And I really had to convince the politicians because they said it would smack like bribery. And I also don't like media junkets. I have a short, I'm a journalist. I always say I'm a journalist at heart, you know. So that's why I hope I have very good media relations, because I always look at media stories from the media's point of view, not from a typical PR point of view. I don't like media junkets. So what we said is that at that time at the editors, we don't want media stories immediate from this media trip, but we want the journalists you're going to send on this trip a long-term investment. We want them to keep on writing on Gautrain, because our construction is imminent. So what we also is we expose them to socio-economic development impacts of a station hub around immediate stations. So we took them to Paddington, where the Heathrow Express comes in in London, and the immense development around Paddington, where Paddington was previously a real dump, the area around it, and the development that Paddington, the Heathrow Express brought to Paddington Station. So we also then took the Channel Tunnel from London to Paris, looked at developments there. So and that changed a lot of the media agenda, a lot of the public agenda. And then when construction happened, what we did is we had a theme throughout construction, proudly taking Gauteng further. And what we did is every month we had a construction update to the public of the people affected, and to the public of Gauteng. And we had it about sort of by the 10th, 12th of the month. And if we don't issue it on time, the public and the media were sort of asking, where's the construction update? And because this was the largest construction project ever in South Africa, in Gauteng, the most built-up city in South Africa. We were tunneling, we were shooting dynamite. We had a tunnel boring machine boring from Rosebank to Park Station. There were huge impacts. We had media. You know how difficult it is to get media to a media event. We eventually I had to ask for 2 visits. Because construction has to almost stop when we have media events. I had to beg the construction company for 2 days, 1 day but 2 events, because we would have 30, 40 media people arriving. I'll never forget, there was this one cool dude from a television, I think it was ETV, and he was actually quite, he had his peak cap the other way around, and then he put his hard hat on, and he was sort of hanging around in the tunnel taking photos. And because the tunnels were so narrow, there was this one vehicle that has 2 mechanisms, a steering wheel here and a steering wheel here. So the driver would drive on this side, and if he's finished on this side, and he has to go back, he would drive on the other side. So this guy was filming, and he saw this, and he saw the guy getting up and going to the other side. And his mouth actually dropped open, and he went. So huge media attention, and that's how you change things, is that you take the people with you on your journey. And I'll never forget the day, how proud I was when one of the media people talked about our Gautrain, when the community took ownership of Gautrain, and it was no longer our Gautrain or my
Just
Gautrain,
yours,
and they talked about our Gautrain. And I thought my job here is done.
I think, it is partly done in some ways, but of course there's constant reassessment of the brand, there's constant revisiting of it. It never remains static.
And it should not.
No, it shouldn't, of course not. And I want to ask you about one major accusation that I think the brand has never been able to live down, and I'm not sure it ever will. The perception that Gautrain is only for the elite.
Yes.
I mean,
We're never going to get...
no.
Not in my... I'm retiring in February of next year. So I don't think in my professional lifetime it will not...
Yeah. So is it true, first of all?
No, it's not.
And on what grounds do you say it's not true?
No, we always... our market position was that... and that was also how we how we do our fares, is that Gautrain should be more expensive than taxis, than to be on a taxi, but less expensive than using your car. And the problem that you and me and everyone that uses our car, is we look at the direct cost of using our car. You put petrol in your car, and you perhaps pay for parking. That's your cost of using your car. You forget about all the indirect costs of using your car. Insurance, all the costs that you have to write off on your car. The cost of time. The N1 currently, if you use Google Maps or Waze, don't even put you on the N1. They take you on the N14 or any of the other routes. It is currently so congested again. My time is worth much more to me than any other cost, you know. So we just had a fare increase meeting yesterday with BOC and BCC, and had a huge debate on fare increases and fares, and looked at e-hailing services and where we are positioned, not only in terms of cost but brand and accessibility, etc. But the elitist tag that was put on Gautrain, unjustifiably so, is a very tough one to get rid of. And unfortunately in South Africa, when you talk about elite, there's always a racist tag on it.
Yes,
and it's always a white tag.
Right,
that it's for the white.
The white affluent.
The white affluent.
Yes.
The white affluent is not on Gautrain. And if you look at our market structure, if you talk LSMs, the LSM 910s is definitely not on Gautrain. They are the people that are stuck on the N1 in their Hummers and their Q8s, and I don't even know what those cars are because I drive a Mini, you know. So
let me ask you, who is largely using the Gautrain at the moment?
Largely it's LSMs 6, 7, 8s. That use Gautrain,
and
which is the middle class.
Demographics,
black females, and a huge amount of learners and students that use it, and to the extent that we have, in COVID times, launched a student product with a huge discount for students, and we've made a decision at the end of last year to extend that to the learners this year, and we'll be rolling it out to learners this year, you know, and that for us is a long-term investment in the brand, and for us as from the government point of view, it's a long-term investment in public transport, because if you can catch 20% of those students that now use student cards, when they start to work to use, the millennials are not interested in buying cars. They want to be mobile through public transport. So if we have a long-term investment in public transport and get those people onto public transport, whether it's Gautrain or bus rapid transport, whatever the case may be, we have made a huge, because in South Africa, typically, public transport was a mode of force. People had to use public transport because they had no other alternative.
Yes.
And the soonest that they had some income, the first thing they bought was a car. Before they even bought a house, they bought a car because public transport was so dreadful.
Yes.
And we have to change that, and we are changing that with Gautrain, where public transport is becoming a mode of choice. In the first, when 8 years ago, we do perception audits. You talked about assessing the brand. We do perception audits every second year. We do market segmentation audits, the alternative here. When we did perception audits and we go to market and we talk to our commuters, you would ask them, do you use public transport? They would say no, emphatically no.
Right.
How often do you use Gautrain? Daily. So
it's not perceived as
Not
your
perceived
typical
as
type
public
of public
transport.
transport.
And that's a big hurdle for us to cross, because you want them to see Gautrain as public transport, because you would like them to use other public transport systems
Yes.
as a feeder system
Right.
into Gautrain, because public transport should be integrated. Gautrain cannot operate as a lone standing brand. It's not been developed as a isolated public transport system. It's been developed for other public transport systems to feed into it.
Right.
For PRASA at Hatfield Station, at Rhodesfield Station, at Park Station, where people can literally walk from those stations into our stations. The bus rapid transport system,
Yes.
Ria Vaya in Johannesburg, Arayeng in Pretoria, where it can just feed into our
Plugs in,
system.
yeah.
But people don't see, in their minds, using Gautrain, see Gautrain as a isolated system.
Yeah.
But we're working on it.
Yeah.
It's one of the battles we are hopefully winning.
It's interesting. It may be because of the standard that you're producing,
Yes.
and the association, the
And
prior
association,
association with public
yes.
transport, that
And the
perception
safety.
exists. Yes,
And
of
the
course.
safety.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that as well. But let me take you back a little bit for a moment here, Barbara. First of all, you spoke about the Hummer Brigade, right? And those are your top earners in the country who prefer to still travel by their own transport. And even if that means sitting in traffic in their luxury cars, that's their preference. Have you just about given up on that target market?
And I would not say completely given up, but we have limited resources in terms of marketing. And you have to look at, I always say to my team, we have to look at the 80-20 principle. I can't spend 80% of my market to get 20% of the people on a system. I have to spend 80% of the budget to get 80% of the people of a market onto the system.
Right.
So I've not given up on them. Hopefully we will. They're on mostly on the airport system,
Right.
and that's where they pay good money to get to the airport.
Okay.
So
But I'm seeing an interesting trend that comes out of the research, which is that their children are making
Yes,
use of the Gautrain.
absolutely.
That is a very interesting development. is
And
it not?
what's a very interesting trend there is that they perceive Gautrain as safe enough for their precious cargo, their precious children,
Yeah.
to be on. I'm a wildlife photographer, and there's always, to me, one of the most precious sights in wildlife is when a lioness pick up her cub, and she carries it from a den to wherever. And I always call it precious cargo if I shoot that photo, because those jaws that can snuff out the life out of a grown buffalo is tender enough to carry that cub, And so that I always sit, if I'm on the train and I travel from Rosebank to wherever, because Rosebank is my origin station, and I see the Kingsmead gulls getting on the train, I always think, my word, parents feel safe enough for their precious gulls to be on the train, and it warmed the cockles of my heart, because that's exactly what we intended the train to be, is that parents and people feel safe enough for their children to travel on the train. And then the other side that absolutely delights me is if we have school children, especially from disadvantaged schools on the train, and we start at Sandton or one of the stations that are on tunnels, and we exit that Marlborough portal, and all of a sudden there's light. To have that wonderful delight on the faces. There's so many moments on this train where the brand just gets life and you're delighted. We work with the SA Guide Dog Association, where they do the puppy walking, where the little pups have to be socialized on systems, on daily systems. And if we take the pups on the system, not only the pups, the interaction with the pups, but the interaction of other commuters with the pups, because they are allowed to interact with the pups.
Right.
They're not allowed to interact with the dogs that are in training, because they are serious, they are at school, they are being trained. But the interaction with the people, with the pups, are an absolute delight to see.
There's something quite intriguing, I think, about this younger group of commuters that you're now welcoming onto the Gautrain. You've spoken about the branding that originated about 15, 16 years ago. Surely you can't use the same branding to attract the new, funky tertiary student or the current students at school. How do you evolve the brand in those ways?
So last year, I think it was, COVID is like, we all have COVID fog, but we had to do the branding for the student product. So my marketing team came to me and they had a new card. We have the Swift card, so they have had a new card and a new campaign, right with a G. So I went, G? What's G? So they all with trepidation looked at me, because they know how I'm about the brand. So they said, this is how this brand talks. And we work very closely with Courtney and TimesLive with Gen X. And they said, this is how this market talks. We can't market to them the same than we to us. I said, okay, I'm open for persuasion, talk to me. And we had, even on our buses, we had this funky pink and gold, pink, for pink, ice cream cones and a golden Rodin sitting, and it was right with a G, and it was hugely successful. So, yeah, you have to evolve with the times, you know. So, what the student product also will entail, and we're busy working on that, rolling it out, is not only product discounts on the train, but partnerships with other brands in terms of rewards.
Right, because this generation wants the entire world connected, don't they?
And everything must fuse into one.
Yeah. So how do you go about that? Are you looking at rewards programs?
Yes, looking at rewards program, partnerships, and everything has to be accessible almost through one card.
Right. Yeah.
To them, the easier the better.
I mean, does this mean, with the growing popularity of the brand among young people in particular, have you solved your NIMBY, not in my backyard problem?
Yes, you know, but we also solved it in terms of businesses and in terms of where people live and play. Now that we are working on Gautrain 2, or what we call the Gauteng Rail Network Extension Program, that we now find that where with Gautrain 1, where we had the NIMBYs, people didn't want Gautrain stations close by, and where it now proved that where Gautrain stations are situated, that the properties around that station area has exponentially increased in value. There may have been a change in the use around stations. If you look at Rosebank, if you look at Sandton, look at Sandton, all the office blocks that has popped up around the Sandton station area. In Rosebank,
yes.
Rosebank is my area. What has happened around Rosebank is it's a completely different area. Now we have businesses, these office block, townhouse, you know, the areas these days have the work, play, live complexes. They now work with us to have a station in their area. So they would pay, they are talking to us to pay for the development of the station themselves,
Right.
as long as we bring the liner into the area. So it's now a completely different story. Is that where now people are vying for to have a station in the area?
That is such a turnaround in terms of the initial fears around it. But I also want to ask about the issue of social media and the brand in this age. You've got
Social
the younger
media.
commuters who are
My
driving
team said
social
I should
media.
not talk about social media.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to allow you to escape something that I think is such an inevitable aspect of all our lives now,
Yeah.
anyone who's working in the public domain. It must be pretty difficult from a brand point of view to evolve into an age where social media has really taken over so many things, when initially that wasn't even a concern of yours
Yeah.
as you began the project.
Well, I just want to start off by saying I'm very glad I was not young in the social media era. That whatever I did could have stayed out of social media. It is a very difficult domain. I'm very much the old guard of brand and brand ownership and brand governance. You know, the brand belongs to you. You're governing your brand. And you had to make a complete 180-degree mind shift on that. Because the brand no longer belongs to you. The brand belongs to the people that use the brand. And the wonderful shift I did make is so it should. Why should the brand belong to you and to the people that work for the brand? It does belong to the people that use your brand. And they should keep you on your toes. Because they are the people that are actually interacting more closely with the brand than what I do. The person that uses the Gautrain on a daily basis is almost closer to the brand than what I do, because I don't use it on a daily basis. Yes, I do work with it very closely on a daily basis, but I don't use it on a daily basis. So those are the people that keep us on our toes. So in terms of evolving brand governance, you have co-ownership of your brand. And what we found on Gautrain, we are on all the social media platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, name it, we're on it. And what we find is that Twitter now, if we go on our Twitter account, unless we push stuff, very quiet until there's an incident.
Yes. How do you deal with that?
Immediately. So the moment that we often get to know that that there's an incident on the system through our Twitter spikes before we get official communication from the operating control center. Unfortunately, we cannot start communicating officially about what is wrong on the system until we get official communication from the operating control center.
Right.
And now you have to know, the operating control center is a huge center room, bank of computers, engineers that are focused on getting the problem solved.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a train stuck in a tunnel. They need to get that train out of the tunnel so that because the moment a train is stuck in the tunnel, for argument's sake, all the other trains stop because that train has to move because the other trains can't move through the tunnel. They focused on getting that train out of the tunnel. They care very little about two communication people that are jumping up and down. What's happening, what's happening, what's happening?
Yeah.
So eventually they listen to us and get comms out to us so that we can answer the questions on Twitter.
Yeah.
They do communicate so that we can communicate to the people on the system, because we need to get the people on the system moving as well. So, but people that sit with their phones in their hands, asking questions, and we understand that.
Yeah.
That's why we're jumping up and down.
Right.
Want information instantaneously.
Yes.
There's an instant gratification syndrome on Twitter, as you know, on Facebook, but more so on Twitter. And we have to, it's a very fine line, and the more time we take to answer that question, the more angry people get. Even if we say we are trying to get information to find out what is wrong, they think we are hiding something. There's always a conspiracy syndrome on social media.
Yeah.
Now we're hiding something. We're bad. There we go. You know, the system is going down the drain. But the turnaround time of getting things back on the track and things are okay again is also very quickly. You know, so the perceived damage to your brand is not that long. You know, you can turn it.
Recover. Do you recover fairly quickly
you
from
recover just quickly.
Okay.
Not quick enough in my mind, but you do recover. You know,
Okay.
and all research, unless it's really severely bad, and we've not had that, fortunately, touch wood, unless you really have we close down the system. You know, so. And when it's a prolonged, we had a train driver strike 3 years ago. That was bad. But you can recover from social media incidences quite quickly if you manage it properly.
Right. Barbara, we're getting some really good questions in from our viewers who are watching from home, and I'm going to ask you to keep your answers relatively short because we've got a few to get through. I'm going to take this first question from Nusifiso, who asks, who funded the Gautrain?
Public-private partnership. So that is the Gauteng provincial government and the national government, so provincial and national fiscus. And because it's a private partnership, also some money from the private sector. But what a PPP actually is about is a risk transfer. So the private sector took risk, and we took risk.
Okay. And just on that note that you mentioned earlier, the issue of the private sector asking you to build additional stations. If they make a proposal to you of that nature, are you open to it?
Yes, of course, especially now with Gautrain too.
All right.
Definitely.
Okay. Josh asks...
We're actually looking for it.
Oh, okay. Well, it's good. It's good for companies to know that. Josh asks, how do you come up with your clever billboard copy? The current petrol head billboards are current and on point with how commuters are feeling.
Clever creative agencies.
Okay. All right. Josh, that should answer your question. You need to have the right agency when you are engaged in this kind of thing. Vanny asks, on reflection, what are the things you believe could have been done differently to get greater traction on the brand positioning program, if any?
Sure. You know, I always ask the question, you know, where were you when the page was empty? But and I ask it to myself because it's a very difficult question upon reflection. Perhaps greater involvement from community from the beginning. Yeah, maybe that. But it's pretty perfect.
Isn't I tell you why it's a good question is because you did have community involvement in terms of building the brand, right? So you held focus groups and that kind of thing. You're asking a wide range of people for their opinions.
Comment lines, what is that? Phone-in lines. We had focus groups.
Yeah.
We had. We had, and Timmy Klafeng helped us with it, Mr. Brand.
Oh, yes. of course.
Yes,
Yeah.
so Debbie
there.
helped us. And that was quite an interesting journey with Debbie.
Yeah,
Loved
I'm
it.
sure. Yeah,
Yes.
he's so proudly South African and
Yeah,
African.
he is, and proudly African.
Yeah.
And that was our brief
Right.
to the agencies, and when I started work, because Debbie worked on our side, he was not part of the creative agencies, and that was our brief. It should be proudly South African, proudly African, and proudly Gauteng. So that was our definite brief.
Okay. Another question asked anonymously. Congratulations on your pending retirement in February, Dr. Jensen Forster. After so many years with Gautrain and with such a passion for the brand, what advice would you give your successor for the future?
To have passion. You can, you can fake a lot of things, but you can't fake passion.
Yeah, that's true. Well, what was it that drove your passion for this brand in the way you have? I mean, many people will launch a brand, and once they feel it's established, they'll move on to another brand that they can do that with. Why did you stick with this one?
I always believed in the team. The Jack van der Merwe, now William Dags, and in the politicians that worked on the team. And because it was a clean project, I think, if there was any sniff of fraud or corruption, I can defend a lot of things. I would have not been able to defend that. I never, ever had to spin a story. I was never asked to conceal something. I never had to lie to the media. I never felt that I was compromised as a person. I never felt that my integrity was, as a person, compromised, and that's why I stuck in. And I always believed in Gautrain, always.
There's an interesting point you make in there, and that's the issue of honesty, because many people believe that marketing and PR is about selling something that isn't quite there, right? Or overselling a product.
Overselling it, yes.
And how important is honesty in birthing a brand, raising that brand, maintaining it, and allowing it to burgeon?
There's no compromise, because you can't. Once you've put that on the line, there's no going back. And in the 22 years now that I've worked on Gautrain, I've never had to do that, ever. And I can say that without batting an eyelid. I've never had to lie to the media. I sometimes had to delay telling you a story because I knew that it was not the right time. And whenever I had to go to the media and I said, I can't comment now, but I can talk in 2 months, always you accepted that. You accepted my bona fides when I said that. And in 2 months' time, I could then talk. But I never had to lie. I never had to spin a story because I knew I was in this for the long run. I could not, in 2001, spin a story and still sit in 2022 talking to you.
Yeah, although it hasn't been known to be done before, not with great success, I would think.
But I don't know how they do it. I simply don't. I sit at the dominant table. I sit at the executive table, so I know what's happening.
Yeah.
I don't parachute in when there's a problem. So I know when there's a problem.
Yeah.
I know when there's a problem starting to happening. So. I'm not the PR poppy.
Yeah, yeah. I want to ask another question on behalf of one of our audience members. How do you make sure you stay innovative, and how do you see the future of Gautrain with technology forever changing?
I stay innovative because I've got an innovative team. You cannot innovate on a project like this, on a brand like this, by yourself. I have an amazing team. They have an amazing team of service providers that they work with. And at some stage you realize you are not mistress of the universe, although you would like to think you are. And you have to let go. but I always trust my gut. If they come to me, and I'll give them a lot of rope, and I'll let them go, but up to a point where I now realize this is going to damage the brand, I would say no.
Yeah.
I've given you enough rope now. Now we have to always trust my gut.
Yeah. A question, and this I think a lot of young people would be interested in. What brands do you have in mind for collaboration, especially for the students and learner programs?
Oh, well, now you're putting hang me out to dry. I have to look at my team for this. And Sandy, that works with them, is not here. And maybe I should look at
names.
maybe I should look at Courtney, because Courtney is the one that works with that project. Courtney, what brands are we looking at?
So perhaps not brand names, but what sort of area they operate in?
Transport,
Yes.
mobile brands,
Yeah.
mobile
phone
brands,
companies, yes.
and clothing brands.
Ah, okay. Well,
Yes.
well, that's interesting. I mean, that's the heart and soul of
Clothing
being
brands,
young.
I mean, it's incredible. They talk about names,
Yeah.
brand names, and I go, what is that? I mean,
We-
I don't have
we've
children,
fallen behind
so
slightly.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't follow brands. I mean, something would fall out of my cupboard, and I would say, okay, I think I'll wear this today. You know, so.
Yeah, I think young people are a lot more focused on that kind of thing. A question about social media. What are your thoughts on social media cancel culture on brands in as far as online reputation is concerned?
You know, cancel brands is very harsh. A brand really has to be get it completely wrong for a brand to be cancelled.
Mm-hmm.
And we often have very robust discussions in the office about this. And it always evolves around, when does a brand like Gautrain enter a discussion on a topic of the day?
Mm-hmm.
And let's take a movement such, it's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
A movement such as it's not okay, apologies, Black Lives Matter
Yes.
starts.
Yeah.
What's happening in Ukraine? When does a brand start associating with something like that? When is the right time? Is there a right time? Do you start associating as a brand with it at all?
Mm.
We often, when the Springboks landed at OR Tambo in 2019, after their victory in Japan.
Yes.
That afternoon, when they landed, and literally the previous day, someone approached me, and I can't remember, and said, can we get Springbok supporters to the airport free of charge?
Mm.
So I thought, oh, God, okay, it's off-peak. Let's see what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So we devised a plan. Everyone that's wearing a Springbok jersey can get to the airport.
Mm-hmm.
So, Murphy, their plane was delayed in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
And how we got to know about that is there were photos tweeted of Sia and the boys having lunch at an airport in Sydney. So guess what? In peak hour, people had to go to the airport.
Yeah.
And it's all good and well, huge traction for the brand.
Mm.
I was actually blamed for ambush marketing. Because everyone was actually talking about they on the Gautrain and photos of them on the Gautrain. Mm-hmm. No one was talking about the Springbok brand or something like that. So I was blamed for ambush marketing. It was SO right. Well, someone asked me to get the people there. So then, you know, you have good intentions,
yes.
and then it backfires on you. So it's that, but then or you would have trains running to rugby events. Then you get blamed, but there are no trains running to soccer events. We don't have stations close to soccer stations. we have to have then buses also running to FNB Stadium, for argument's sake, which makes it very logistically very difficult. So, do you then just, for commercial purposes, have trains running to a rugby event? Because we have stations close to rugby stadiums, but then you get blamed for not running to a soccer event.
It's a fine line.
It's a fine line. When Miss South Africa, when she came home when she was crowned as Miss Universe, that Saturday morning we ran people that was wearing tutus or crowns or something pink. That Saturday morning could go and meet her and ride on the Gautrain for free. Some other concern blamed us for supporting beauty and beauty without a purpose. So you innocently support something we were very proud of. A beautiful South African lady crowned Miss Universe. There was this beautiful white and black and all colors, little girls holding hands, waiting for their icon to appear. And someone tweeted and was supported that we support beauty without a purpose. You never win.
So you've got to think really hard about what you commit to.
And what you support as a brand. Do you support animal cruelty, against animal cruelty, and have a lion cup in a cage at your station, and you don't support some other orphanage? Because the moment you put up a poster with supporting animal cruelty, against animal cruelty, but you don't support cruelty against humans or children, you are seen as, well, Gautrain only supports animals, they don't support orphanage. We do. It was just, you saw that poster, you didn't see the poster that we flighted free of charge of hospice or Nkosi Haven or whatever the case was before the time. People see what they want to see. And the same with, then they get on social media. So you really walk a very fine line when you take to social media. But I don't know about cancelling brands. You have to be very strong. You have to be Black Lives Matter before you cancel a brand.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us, Dr. Barbara Jensen Forster. It's been fascinating speaking to you. And of course, these are ubiquitous brands that surround us every day. And perhaps this conversation reveals that there's a lot more to the established ones than meets the eye. And Gautrain is one example of a pioneering African brand that faced a good deal of criticism at the start, but it still faces an element of that today. And still remains a brand that's growing and widening its customer base. So I want to again thank Dr. Barbara Jensen Forster for sharing her insights as someone who's been on this journey with Gautrain since the beginning. Always good to have you watching. And let me just remind you as to the prizes in the room and prizes up for grabs if you're online today. A 1,000 Rand Gautrain card is available, as well as a 500 Rand take-a-lot voucher. So that is what you're entitled to. I hope that you have entered, and I thank you so much for watching today, and of course for your excellent questions. Thank you to the GMA for partnering with TimesLive to make this conversation a reality. I hope it's been useful to you. We'll be back with 3 further installments looking at different aspects of Gautrain over the next few weeks. Don't miss those. From me, Joanne Joseph, take care. Bye-bye.